who is moving all the waters, who is holding up the moon, who is peeling back the darkness with the burning light of noon, who is standing on the mountains, who is on the earth below, who is bigger than the heavens, and the lover of my soul. Creator God, He is Yahweh, the great I am. He is Yahweh, the Lord of all. He is Yahweh. Rose of Sharon, He is Yahweh, the righteous Son. He is Yahweh, the three-in-one. He is Yahweh. Who is He that makes me happy? Who is He that gives me peace? Who is He that brings me comfort? Turns the bitter into sweet. Who is stirring up my passion? Who is rising up in me? Who is filling up my hunger with everything I need? Creator God, He is Yahweh, the great I am. He is Yahweh, the Lord of all. He is Yahweh. Rose of Sharon, He is Yahweh, the righteous Son. He is Yahweh, the three-in-one. He is Yahweh. Creator God, He is Yahweh, the great I am. He is Yahweh, the Lord of all. He is Yahweh. Rose of Sharon, He is Yahweh, the righteous Son. He is Yahweh, the three-in-one. He is Yahweh. Yahweh, 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 Yahweh. Yes, You are Yahweh, 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 Yahweh is Your name, Yahweh. Yes, You are the great I am, and You are the Lord of all. Yes, You are the great I am, and You are the Lord of all. You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Love has called my name. I've been born again into a family. Your blood flows through my veins. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I am surrounded by the arms of a Father. I am surrounded with songs of deliverance. We've been liberated from our bondage. You're the sons and the daughters. Let us sing our freedom. You split the sea so I can walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescued me and I will stand and sing. I am a child of God. Yes, I am. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. No, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God.
Good morning and welcome to BVC Online. Can you believe this is our last Sunday in lockdown? Yes, our last Sunday just in lockdown. We are reopening next week, Sunday, July the 5th. As you can see from my little tour, we are setting up still under the government regulations that have been set in place. We are still working on that, so if you need any information, please pop over to our webpage or our Facebook page for more details on that. If you are a regular with us, we would ask you to check your emails. We are going to send out an email at some point during the week to you for updated regulations. We would ask you to keep an eye on your email for that. If you are new, if you haven't been here before, we would ask you to drop us a message on Facebook or on our Instagram platform. We have an email address as well. It's hello@bvcchurch.com if you would like any information on attending with us soon. We are still continuing on with our Connect groups at the minute over Zoom. We are still meeting over the social medias as well. We are hoping over the summer, now that the guidelines and we're opening up again, that we will be able to spend some time going out for walks together, for picnics, just to have some time in building friendships and learning about God. If you would like more information about that, again, please drop us a message on any of our social media platforms. Now, just a bit of information about Kidsland. We are going to go ahead with Kidsland next week and for the following Sundays, but we will only be having one Kidsland service. That is at the 10 a.m. service. So if you would like your child, or if you are a family with children who would like to come and attend the church at the minute, please be aware that we need you to book in your children, to register with us, so we know to prepare for you and your children. So please let us know for the 10 a.m. service, either through our Facebook, our Instagram, or again by our email service, to let us know so we can prepare for your child. This is only the 10 a.m. service. Kidsland Online will still be going ahead. We are still providing links and lessons, songs, worship. We've been having science experiments. We've been having great fun over there. Our description, in the description box below will be our link, or it'll be across the screen here now. Now, again, we are so grateful that we are coming back into a building that I am standing in. I'm so excited to say that this is our building now, and we would not be where we are right now, like I've been saying, without your donations and your giving. We have been so blessed, so incredibly blessed, and God's been just so amazing through this time. If you would like to be able to donate to us, if you would like to give, I'm just going to hand you over to Eric to give you a small demonstration of how and different ways that you can give to us now. Thank you.
Open the Facebook app or go to facebook.com and go to our page, Barrow Valley Community Church. Click the donate button at the top of the page and this will take you to the payment portal. Once this loads, enter the amount that you wish to donate. Below this you can choose whether to use PayPal or enter your card information, either credit or debit card. Once finished, click donate. If you would like to give through our website, go to your web browser and go to bvcchurch.com. On the home page, scroll to the bottom, there's a section called Give. Click on this, and then the page that loads, click on the donate button. This will take you to the I Donate portal, where you can fill in your details. Again, select either PayPal or select credit or debit card. Enter your information, select the amount, select whether it's a once-off gift or a recurring gift, and click Next to complete the process.
Welcome to BVC Online. We're so happy that you could join us today. As always, we're happy to see you as we begin a brand new series today called He's Still Got the Whole World in His Hands. This series is a follow-on series from the one we've just completed, which was about our anxieties and our worries especially, but a reminder again as we are living in this season of absolute uncertainty, and although our communities are beginning to open up again and a certain degree of normality is returning, no one is still certain how things are going to work out. And there's, even in relation to everything in our lives, there's no certainty. So there's still anxiety, still different things going on in people's lives that follow the subject that we've already looked at, and what we're going to look at again, beginning in this new series, is that idea that we see from the scriptures of people who lived in real life situations. Sometimes when we read the Bible, we see the end point of every story, but sometimes we've got to look through how that point affected the lives of those who were engaged with it and learn from them. Now, one of the most dramatic moments in both biblical and human history took place in what we commonly call the upper room. Otherwise, it was that meal that was commonly known to others as the Last Supper. The Last Supper is better known in the Jewish context as the celebration of the Passover meal. Now, Passover was something that was given to God by to the Hebrew people many, many years before Jesus and his disciples celebrated this, simply to commemorate that occasion when God delivered Israel from the power of the Egyptian rule, broke those powers and gave them the freedom to release when the blood of a lamb was put on the doorpost and the lintel of every home, and the angel of death, when he saw that blood, passed over that house, and any home who weren't marked out, the firstborn in that family died. And that was the reality of what they were celebrating, is when God freed them through the Passover of an angel of death who spared their lives. And the following morning, as they celebrated this last meal before they left Egypt, the following morning they were released from slavery into freedom through what God had done to them. It was an annual celebration, but what was interesting to know is that that whole feast, as it were, that whole occasion was a definition of something, a freedom that came at a price, both to the lives of those lost, both to the whole purpose of sacrifice and everything. It came as an occasion. But together with his disciples, this wasn't the first time that Jesus celebrated the Passover. He had done it on at least 2 occasions with them. But this occasion was different. There was something going to be different to every occasion there was before. Now, what we need to understand is as Jesus came in to Jerusalem on this particular occasion, the notable thing is Jesus at this stage had a price on his head, so to speak. The powers that be were looking for an opportunity to kill him, to arrest him, to kill him, and so on. And I'm wondering, even as they entered the atmosphere of the room that night, possibly even from the time that they entered Jerusalem, did the followers of Jesus, did his disciples even sense that there was something different about this occasion? Because Passover, the whole purpose was to be a celebration. It was a joyous occasion. It was everything to just celebrate the greatness of God. But there was something different about this particular night, because again, as you read the text of the Gospels, you'll see that as they approached Jerusalem on this occasion, Jesus started to openly speak about his death. And although he explained clearly what he was talking about, they didn't understand it. They didn't seem to get what was going on at that moment in time. For that matter, they didn't even know what he was talking about, what it was supposed to mean. Because like us, they probably had this idea in their head that when God is on your side, or when God is physically present with you, everything should get better, not worse. At least that's the way they think. But yet, there was no getting away from the difference between that night and the previous nights. And Mark's Gospel actually tells us in chapter 14 and verses 17 and 18, Mark actually tells us that when that evening came, Jesus arrived to the upper room, but while they were reclining at the table, Jesus actually said to them, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating at the table with me." Now when you read the text, I wonder if you've ever noticed that nobody asked him the question, "Betray you to who?" I think they already knew that there was something going to happen, but they just didn't understand the who. But at the same time, as Jesus put it, it was one of the dinner guests at the occasion. Now that probably made it extra tense in the room and brought an extra anxiety, because surely a dinner guest, somebody you had invited to be a special guest on this special occasion, was now going to betray? Now that of course meant that in the next verse, as soon as they heard this, of course they were saddened. Verse 19, and one by one that automatic question comes up, "Surely you don't mean that it's me? Who could it be in the room?" And his answer to them is, "Yes, it's one of you, one of my dinner guests. You're going to be here tonight, you're going to celebrate with us, you're going to do all, but you're going to be my betrayer." But Jesus followed up by making it clear that in spite of the pending betrayal and everything that was going to happen, he made it clear that this was no coincidence, it was no unexpected event. Verse 21 of Mark's Gospel, chapter 14, tells us that he makes clear to them that the Son of Man will go just as the prophets had already written about them. What I love about the Bible when we read it is that it never hides those moments in the lives of those who lived in that situation. When they were probably trying to figure out, what is he talking about? We don't understand. They were living in that present moment and trying to figure out, who is he talking about? And at the same time, what form of betrayal? What is all this about? You see, when we read the Bible, you'll discover that it's not just a book about a lot of good people having fun. It's not just about people sailing into the angelic sunset and everything is bliss. No, it's exactly a book to turn to in times of uncertainty, in times when you don't know what's going on around you, but when you read through it, you look into the lives of those who've been in similar situations, possibly even far worse than what you can ever imagine, with frightening uncertainty. The Bible is not a book where every dream, every ambition, everything we live and hope for is just going to automatically happen in our lives because God is on our side as we see that. You see, God never promised us any such thing. And if you read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, from cover to cover, there's no account of any such promise to anyone. And every individual you look at, especially their lives in the Bible, they're testimonies to the fact that no such promises were made. The Bible is written from the perspective of these people who lived with absolute uncertainty. Uncertainties far greater than many of us will ever even begin to understand. And yet through it all, through all of the uncertainty, God's people were learning that God was still faithful and God was still certain in spite of those times of absolute uncertainty in their lives. You see, even when it appears that God is silent, He is still there. Even when it appears He's absent and nowhere in sight and appears to abandon you. No, he hasn't. God is still there. The Bible is a book that tells us about a teenager called Joseph. Now, this is not the same Joseph who was the husband of Mary, the mother of Jesus. This was a Joseph known to many of us as the guy with that wonderfully coloured coat, the multicolour, technicolor dream coat, as it's often referred to. No, that's him. That's who we're talking about, way back in the Old Testament. We find him in a pit, in a well, dumped there by his brothers who were out to kill him because they just didn't like him. They absolutely hated him. But there he was, and I wonder, when I think of his story in the Old Testament, was he there possibly overhearing the conversations over his head, listening to his brothers from where he was, trying to make up their minds, will we kill him? Will we sell him? What are we going to do with him? But we've got to get rid of him. We don't want this guy around. And can you imagine Joseph being down there, listening to all this from his perspective? And of course it goes, beyond that it shows the cash option. So Joseph is sold into slavery and ends up in Egypt, as it were. But down in Egypt, his slave master has him, looking over his household and doing all of that stuff. But what we'll find in the text as you read it is that constant reminder that in spite of his circumstances, in spite of that betrayal by his brothers, in spite of serving there as a slave in a country that he wasn't even born in, it says God was with Joseph. But the thing is, as his life there progressed, his slave master's wife took a fancy to him, as we would say, but Joseph refused. And because of his constant refusal, she set him up for some jail time. Now that's, for the life of us, not the way it should work, as many would see it, but he ends up in a prison. But it tells us that even in the prison, God is still with Joseph, but the circumstances is not the kind of stuff you want happening in your life. God was still, however, with Joseph. And in that prison, in that dungeon, whatever way we want to term it, Joseph at a certain point meets with a cupbearer to the king who is potentially sentenced to death. Gives him good news at the word from God that on this occasion your life is going to be spared. You're lucky, pal. You're going to come out of this alive. But Joseph asks the cupbearer, will you remember me to Pharaoh? Because I'm in this place I shouldn't be. I'm falsely accused. I shouldn't even be in Egypt, let alone in prison. So remember me. Don't forget me. But of course the text tells us he did. But even in spite of that, God was still with him. We look at a story later on in the book of Kings of a king called David. And David wakes up one morning to discover his own son Absalom, had raised up an army, and they were heading towards Jerusalem to both destroy Jerusalem and to dethrone David as king. His own father, he had intended to kill him, take the kingdom and be king himself. And David goes on the run from his own son, and through all that frightening difficulty when a whole army was out to get him and his own life was on the line, the text tells us that in spite of how it all seemed, God was still with David. That's an amazing thing. Then there was Moses. Moses, when he was a baby, was hidden in the bulrushes and floated out on the Nile River by his own mother to protect him from a tyrant king of Egypt, determined to wipe out a generation of boy children simply because the population of Israel was growing so big that it became a threat to the national security of Egypt at the time. This king became scared, and the best way to do it is wipe out a generation of young boys to make sure this wouldn't happen. And for the safety of her son, a woman called Jochebed, Moses' mother, floated him away. She hadn't a clue what was going to happen to him. But here's the thing, God was with Moses, even as a baby, making sure that everything was okay. And it's interesting as you read the text, God used this same child Moses to be the one who would deliver Israel through the power of God, but he would use Moses to be the one to break that power of slavery and to lead the people of Israel out of that oppressive regime and into the freedom they would enjoy. Many years later, you read a story quite similar to it of King Herod. King Herod the Great, as history would put it, hearing this rumour going around that there was a king born. We hear the story regularly over the Christmas season. And it's not just a Christmas series, a nativity play or anything like that. This is a reality of something that happened in human history. When a king hears this rumour, and it's live, it's a real situation happening in a real world in real time, and he's threatened. This rumour of who this child born was going to replace him as king, and as a safety measure for his own throne and his own right to stay on that throne, he sends out the edict to make sure that every boy child around the area up to a certain age is killed, just to make sure that he was protected and his throne and all the rest of it was protected. A whole generation. Can you imagine our town, our community, if such a thing were to happen, there'd be an absolute outrage. There'd be the horrors of how this. So imagine the world in which this felt. And you can imagine and understand why Mary and Joseph decided they were getting out of town for the safety of their son Jesus. And they went to Egypt, the frightening uncertainty. But the text tells us, as you read the story, that in spite of this horrific time, God still had the whole world in his hand. You see, every time when you read the text and when it seemed that darkness was at its worst, when it seemed that all of the evil in the world had won, the battle was won, and when it seemed that heaven had lost, when it seemed that all was over and God was nowhere in sight, yes, when you read the text, you'll discover he was there, holding everything in his hands. So we go back to the text and you'll discover, as you read verses 22 to 24, that when they were eating, that same celebration that night, when they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," Jesus said to them. Jesus takes bread, Jesus takes wine, and refers to it as his own broken body and his own poured out blood on this occasion. Now sometimes it's so easy to read that text and kind of understand the communion element of it as we would see it. But I want to challenge you tonight to get into the shoes of those who were there listening to Jesus on the night. And I'm sure what they had just heard Jesus saying must have taken their breath away. It must have absolutely knocked them back, simply because the custom that they were used to in celebrating Passover was this occasion of breaking bread, drinking wine, to celebrate the Passover lamb that probably at that same time was being prepared to be killed over in the temple at the far side of town and so on. And that's what we're used to. But now, on this occasion, Jesus is using those symbols to refer to himself. Get into their shoes, and I wonder if they got that. Were they in that situation looking at each other and kind of thinking, what's he talking about? You know, I'm sure as Jesus began to reveal these things to them on the night, that panic was beginning to set in. The emotional sense of this already charged night, a betrayer already, and now this, the speaking of his death. Now he's talking about himself being the Passover lamb. Can you imagine the confusion? Can you imagine what they were thinking? You know, here, I wonder if they even knew that the news that was going to come as the night progressed was going to get worse. Because not only is there a betrayer in the room that night, but on the Mount of Olives, that same night, verse 27, Jesus actually tells them, you're all going to fall away. You're all going to desert me. So the night goes from bad to worse to even worse still. You will all desert me. But Jesus continues in the next verse, verse 28, to say to them, listen guys, but after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Now, I'm not 100% sure that at this point of the night, Peter was even listening to the conversation anymore, because something tells me he'd had enough of this talk. You know, I'm sure on any tense night, when you're hearing one piece of apparent bad news after the other, you kind of get to that point where you say, hang on a second here. You know, enough of this stuff, Jesus. I can imagine Peter doing that. That seemed to be the kind of character he was. You know, enough of this talk about betrayals. You know, enough of this talk about death. Enough of this stuff already. You know, give us some credit. Give us credit for something. You know, we just don't want to hear any more of this stuff. You know, here we are. We've stood by you, Jesus, up to this point, and we're going to stand by you until the very end. And here's what I want to add to it, Jesus, and you can imagine this coming out of Peter's mouth. Even if those guys there, even if they run away, I'm certainly not going to do it. I'm going to be with you right to the very end. You can count on me. But as we know, later that same night, Peter did what he did. What a mind-blowing night that must have been for the disciples of Jesus. You see, up to this particular point, everything just seemed to be so good. And now their whole world appeared to be crumbling all around them. But I'm sure it left a massive question in their hearts. Where is God in all of this? We thought he was on our side. In fact, we were so sure that Jesus himself was God. You know, this isn't how it's supposed to work out. But the question goes, in that situation and in something like it, in those most confusing and frightening circumstances, can you still trust God in spite of them? You see, that night, if ever heaven was silent, it was silent on that occasion. The silence of God must have been deafening on that occasion. And yet the question remains, in spite of the silence, in spite of the apparent absence, when God seemed to be nowhere to be seen, not even felt, can he still be trusted when the whole world around you is just falling apart? Can we know the surety of who he is? See, the answers to these questions will determine the outcome of the choices we make in uncertain times. And we live, as I've said already, in very uncertain times. And we've got to make decisions. We've got to know and we've got to feel where we go. And usually we can't handle situations where it feels we're on our own. We've got to make our decisions. You see, we've got this idea in our head that if God is on our side, we should be on a constant up and everything should be good. It should go forward and not backwards. You see, we expect God to shine on everything in our lives, to bless our home, bless our family, bless our jobs, our finances, and make sure we have happy lives. And there are many people who build the foundations of their confidence on the hope that that's what God is there for, and that's what he's going to do. But from cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation of the Bible, it'll make it clear to you if you read it. It doesn't work like that. And the question that we need to answer is, when you discover that, if you've not already discovered it, even the hard way, will you still trust God with your tomorrows? Now, I would love to get myself a time machine. A couple of weeks ago I wanted a time machine too, but I'm looking for another one tonight. I would love to go back to a time when, even a few months after that night when the disciples were in the room, Just a couple of months later, when the whole picture had unfolded a little better to them, and asked them the question, what was the darkest moment in your time with Jesus? You know, when was your hope in him at its lowest? And I think they might say it began that same night of the Passover meal. They would probably tell you that we witnessed that same betrayal that Jesus was talking about. And as much as he was speaking about his death, we actually were witnesses to the fact that it happened. We even deserted him. We actually saw him being arrested. We knew about his trial and we knew about his crucifixion. We knew all these things. It was probably the worst night of our lives, the worst occasion of our lives. And what's more, we had this fear that now that he's gone, they're going to come after us. You know, what a night to actually think that God couldn't possibly be in any part of this. So here's a second question I want to ask these guys if I was able to go back. What in your time with Jesus do you think you witnessed as God doing his greatest work? Was it the miracles? Was it any particular one? The healings, the raising of the dead? What about that night when Jesus turned water into wine? I'm sure that was a cool experience. You know, which one was it, guys? You know, what was the most exciting time when it appeared that the whole of the kingdom of God was just at its most magical moment, for the sake of better words? I think they might answer in a way that we would never expect. That it was those very same hours when we thought that God was doing the least, that actually God was doing the most. You see, during the darkest moments of that occasion, God was working out the salvation plan for humankind. It was being fulfilled in those darkest hours. God's greatest work for humanity was being accomplished in those darkest moments. And that's the gospel story. That's the story in which we place our faith, but it's not the way we would do it, but it is the way God does it. See, the question for us all is to understand that God's best work is done in the darkest and most difficult of times, but yet understand and ask ourselves this question: will we still hold strong when we can't see his hand at work? When our doubts and fears are at maximum, the Bible is the perfect place to go, because there you'll find the accounts of all of those who've gone before us and are witnesses to the fact that God is there in the darkest moments, and in these moments he is doing his greatest work. And although we might argue that this doesn't make my situation feel any better right now, you're probably right. But it does teach us to know and to embrace the uncertainty that we live in, with the certainty that somehow in the middle of it all, God is still in control. You see, there's a way to be at peace right in the middle of the storm. Just like that time when Jesus was in the boat with his disciples and the storm was raging all around them. They were terrified of their lives that they were going to sink, but Jesus was there in the boat asleep. You know, what was he doing sleeping at a time like this? But the fact is, even there, Jesus was with them. He hadn't deserted them. He wasn't gone. He was there. Not doing what they wanted him to do or hoped he would do, or not being there as they probably wished he would, so much so that they woke him up. But Jesus asked them that same question: why did you doubt? I was here with you all the time. That didn't change. You see, we need to trust him in spite of the fact that the storm is real. The fact that he's there, it means he's watching over us regardless of how it appears, and he has still got the whole world in his hands. The Apostle Paul assures us like this in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, that we know that in all things, not some things, But in all things, whatever those issues are that's going on in your life right now, be it a threat to your job, the threat to your marital relationship, your whatever situation in education, the uncertainty of the world you're living in, whether you're stone broke financially, whether you don't know whether you can pay tomorrow's bills, whatever it is, we know that in all of these things, God works. God works. Let me repeat it one more time. God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. And this is the ultimate truth. Based on the evidence of the scriptures, God works on our behalf. But sometimes we have to acknowledge the fact that he doesn't work as soon as we expect him. Sometimes it takes a little while. It takes a patient endurance to get there, just waiting on the certainty of God to come through. You see, many people will testify, as well as those in the scriptures, that in the darkest moments of their lives, when it appeared that all hope was gone, when you just wanted to give up, God was still there, holding the whole world in his hands. You see, I can't change the uncertainty of the world I live in, but I can trust the certainty of God, which never changes. And my hope, as much as I hope that your hope is in him. See, everything about your world and about my world is firmly in his hands. And our God works for us. He is active for us. But to finish the verse that I just read, who are called according to his purpose. You see, like those people, Joseph, Moses, David, and even Jesus, even their parents and the different ones that we mentioned, even the stories that I didn't count tonight, everyone were called for a purpose. And so much so that he's called us too. He's called you too. He has a plan and a purpose for you. And that purpose is for the greater good of both the kingdom of God and even down to your own personal good. Now I'm just going to close it for this occasion, and we'll continue with part 2 of this, maybe not necessarily this week to come, because next Sunday we're reopening the BVC building, and we'll be probably doing things a bit different, but we will touch on this subject in one way or the other, and I look forward to you joining us physically here in the building if you can, or if you can't, we will still hopefully be putting ourselves out online to you, and we look forward in whatever way to seeing you again next week. Thanks for joining us this week. Let's pray and just commit this time of the message of God to him, and just really pray that we'll understand and hear and learn to live in an uncertain world, learn to live in the certainty of who God is. Father, thank you tonight again, Lord, that you're an unchanging God. Nothing about you ever changes. You are certain from the beginning of time. You're the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. Nothing changes about you. Everything is always certain. And we live and sometimes build our securities on an uncertain and unstable world. We know nothing about tomorrow that's certain. Be it in our jobs, be it in our lives, be it in our family. We know nothing. And we live in total uncertainty, but in you, I pray, Lord, that we can put our trust and hold on to the hope that in spite of how things seem in this life, in spite of how absent you might appear to be, you are at that moment in time still present, but doing your greatest work. Thank you, Father. Amen. Thanks again. See you next week, and have a good week. Amen.
Well everyone, that's all for today. We hope that you were challenged and encouraged by the message that you just heard. If you would like to get in touch with us, on the next slide is a summary of our contact details, but make sure to get in touch if you have any questions, any items of prayer or encouragement. We would love to hear from you. Don't be shy. We really want to connect with you, especially at this time. And a reminder about our giving options. If you are able to give, I ask you please consider doing so. But likewise, if you're not able to give, please reach out to us and let us know, because we would love to be able to help you in any way that we can. Have an amazing week ahead, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.